This week, we're going to give you this today a step-by-step case, starting with the very simple question of what are the low progressive values inherently in today, right? So let's talk about the low progressive values. Largely mean that these are the kind of values that might be more individual with right. Talking about like randomness right, and gatefold, and area right, and stuff like that, right? So we think that the reason why they're fundamentally really important is because they are in this or change, because they are inherent for changing status quo for the betterment of use of network, because they allow for people to have access to their rights, allow more groups to have access to their rights. This is versus the conservative status quo, which often has status quo versus conservative often create the status quo and a retrograding of these rights of certain individuals. We're talking about certain people getting victimized, especially talking about sexual getting victimized, especially. But on transsexuals getting victimized, especially women getting victimized, especially. We're talking about all these minority groups, even minority racial groups getting victimized. So we want to prevent this kind of victimization at society layer, and inherently having zero progressive values in this house will allow for us to prevent all this kind of victimization, allow for the progress in terms of allowing people to access rights. So that's why this is inherently good. So why is it using this as a mechanism is particularly useful and particularly useful, right? Because it allows for us to stop the echo chambers of the conservatives around their own values. That fundamentally liberal progressives are much more open to exploring ideas as opposed to conservatives. Conservatives are much more bold up in terms of the ideas and what I want to do.
So we should also mandate the teaching of liberal values in schools across America, including Ireland.
Yes, we're totally fine with that. So anyway, back to this case. The idea is that where was I? Yeah, just talking technology. So we think that the problem is when we characterize conservatives, oftentimes they're very bold up in their own something. They don't really go and like question their own conservatism. They're not really sure. And there's a lot more ignorance regarding this program development. So for simple, like example, people like my mom are inherently conservative, but they don't really have like antagonistic views of liberal progressives. They just don't really get liberal progressives. Like they don't really understand the right. They don't ignorant regarding all these concepts. So think about that point. That this kind of ignorance can be dispelled by using this mechanism, because this kind of word isn't inherently antagonistic towards the proposal. They aren't opposed to it on a fundamental level. They just don't really know it enough.
Yeah. So that means the bound of conservative. So in an instance where someone is conservative and refers the Bible as the category of everything gay people for, what do you think? Who do you think will win this problem?
So you can't just and say that only Westboro Baptist Church are conservatives, right? Also, the people who hold on to conservative values without having a good idea of what liberal progressive values are also entitled to being called conservative. So I have to challenge you on that point. And also, we think that we'll deal with the idea of inherently antagonistic people. So why is it that Facebook is particularly good mechanism? Because by dispelling these echo chambers, this perpetuation of conservative values, which is people are constantly exposed to all their faults, you can dispel this ignorance. The reason why Facebook works especially well is look at the kind of articles that you'll get exposed to. We're talking largely about clickbait articles that are interesting and that will promote your people reading them and accessing them. First, we think that my mom is going into and so all the people who are generally conservative are going to read this up because they're clickbait, and they're necessarily meant to be a little bit interesting and to engender some kind of informational discourse, right? It means that information flows, even though that information is important because these people are largely ignorant. And I think that allows for more discourse and more thinking on the parts on the part of these people, right? So basically, information changes opinions. particularly good for allowing information to seep into the conservative population. So moving on, the idea is that so moving on as to why Facebook should take this position at all, right? Because firstly, they have a moral group, but we already pointed out that liberal progressive values are inherently good things, right? Secondly, you see that they have a right to do it because they are naturally they are accommodating companies, right? So let's take a look at what we mean by this, right? We think that all companies have the right to further opinions, let's say, that are inherently beneficial to them, right? So let's look at more moral produce examples, which allows things like oil companies and cigarette companies, allowing for think tanks, finding huge amounts of money into think tanks to do research on why these things aren't going to be bad, why oil companies are great, why cigarettes aren't that bad for health, right? To do this kind of like moral dubious kind of research. So we think that when that kind of moral dubious research is allowed and companies have a right to do that, then definitely Facebook has a right to do something that isn't morally dubious or morally good. Right? On another level, we already see that Facebook has some kind of that Facebook already has a track record of championing these causes, right? So if you look at simple things like the what's it called? The one where you allow to change your profile picture to the rainbow colors to support like homosexual rights and stuff. That's already something where Facebook shows that they are willing to take a liberal progressive stance and that they are inherently supporting the liberal progressive stance. I don't think a huge amount of antagonism was engendered from the conservative community because of these methods, right? Because they're fairly still quite passive. And so that's why we think that Facebook already doesn't necessarily change their method of operating anything, right? So moving on to the idea of the potential dangers and the lack of conversion, right? So why isn't this fundamentally like bad? Because it's worse. Because we tell you that you still have an opt-out functionality. It's true. The idea that you can just stop using Facebook because Facebook is still a profit-making company, right? It means that you just opt out because it isn't like a government service. You just stop using Facebook, stop logging in. But we also think that the amount of people who are so pissed off as to do that at all aren't going to be that high. Let's look at the track record that has been used now, right? When conservatives, even those like the ones Ron mentioned, the Westbrook Baptist guys, right? They have like big problems with any liberal progressive values. Even these people don't log on Facebook just because you can support gay rights by having the multicolored profile picture. It's just not a thing that happens. It's just not a drastic measure. It's taken by this community. The first thing we think that is not propagandism, which means that it's not coercing people. But at the same time, that propagandism isn't going to be taken very often by people, which renders our policy effective in the first place. Right? So for all these reasons, these are very, very powerful.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a good Christian conservative boy. But the moment when I don't watch porn, I don't support gay rights, I don't support certain things that is out of my content. But the moment when Facebook try to customize my content and telling me what is right or wrong, I will just choose not to use Facebook around entirely. I'll just choose not to use Facebook because I'm conservative and I think that it's offending my right, and Facebook is trying to assimilate things that I do not want to know about. Moving on, let me tell you why do we actually reject the proposal being proposed by the government side. First, we think that it's unfair to impose certain standards on users itself. Users should be able to choose to be able to choose what they want to know and what they actually and I'm going to tell you how it's beneficiary under our paradigm. Moving on to the rebuttals of this debate. We need to understand that this government side came out with a very neutral, very neutral point, saying that, oh, it's a moral duty. Yes, we think it's a moral duty, but it's very neutral. What exactly? Because they cannot tell us how is it being examined, how society is going to regulate it, and how these people are going to react. They're going to come up with a mechanism telling that under their paradigm, where people can just choose to opt out of it and not entirely forced to adhere to this kind of standards being imposed to them. In the end of the day, people just choose to opt out of it and there will be no organic change. That is something that I'm going to come to later. And then second, they talk about how exactly this kind of conservatives are being brought out. How exactly they're living in an Amish society where they are not being exposed to other media. We believe under the 21st century, you're being exposed to certain ideas, and those ideas that they choose to reject or accept it. And it's not the right of Facebook to regulate it and impose this kind of standard on those kind of people. Let me tell you what the government did not try to accept exactly. And why Facebook is so popular. Why is Facebook such a mechanism that is being used in this debate? Let me tell you why Facebook is so important. The reason Facebook is so widely accepted is because of its ability to customize the content, its ability to appeal to people, its ability to increase the user experience of Facebook. The moment that you control this content, which is not personalized, it disincentivizes individuals to actually use Facebook in the first place. They will just say that it's not my view, and hence you're imposing this kind of standard to me. Hence there will be no places to discuss, and people will just choose to opt out of Facebook and not entirely use of it. Because the incentive of them using it in the end of the day is being removed when it is opposing their views and it's against their views and against their views, and they will not use it entirely. I'm going to talk about my points in 3 levels. First, I'm going to talk about how under our paradigm it's better to improve discourse. Second, I'm going to talk about how under their paradigm there's no organic change. Third, I'm going to talk about how this imposing this standard is unfair to Facebook user, a conservative Facebook user in the end of the day. First, I'll tell you how exactly does it improve discourse. We need to understand this. Society, we live in a very diverse society, where people have different views and different ideology that they refute. The reason why Facebook is so particular, why people want to opt into it, is because it's the accumulation of voice, where we look for friends who have the same idea that we have, and then we try to form a group and try to speak up on it, and try to speak up on it. The moment when we speak up on it and put out a certain comment about it, the society will try to regulate their rhetoric. Whether it's a rhetoric or whether it's something that's deemed acceptable in society. The society will tell us, people will try to counter us and give us view on how is it right? Am I being too conservative, or am I being too skewed to certain things? We believe that the moment when you set those standards to the faith, the moment when you set these standards, the moment when you don't let people discuss and find the accumulation of voices, the moment you stop that, you actually stop the freedom of speech on Facebook itself. Because why are you imposing this kind of standard, this kind of article, progressive article on a conservative society? Let me tell you why exactly you silence the discourse. Why exactly people will not have discourse in the end of it. First, because users right now will see that, oh, because Facebook right now is imposing a standard on me, has maybe my standard is wrong. So they are afraid to talk about it right now, because it's actually being discriminated by society itself and not trying to talk about it, because in the end of the day, they are afraid they will be shunned by the society, their friends will not accept that in the end of the day. They can't find the people that have the same ideology with them in the end of the day and choose not to adhere to it in the end of the day. Has been shunned and alienated by society itself. and silencing the discourse that's happening so that society can take in and regulate it in the end of it. Let me tell you how exactly there's no organic change. Because even if your content is regulated, they are saying that they're saying that magically somehow these people click into the content and read about it. We tell you it is even worse. Why exactly? Because when you impose this content to these people will say that, oh, this is not my taste, this is not my cup of tea. Hence, Facebook is forcing me to do it. Hence, there will be a further backlash. On first level, you stop using Facebook entirely. Second, you choose to hate the content, the liberal progressive content, even worse. You're trying to say that these people are telling me what is right and what is wrong, and I can't determine what is right and what is wrong in the end of the day. Hence, the liberal progressive movement is even worse under the paradigm, because right now there's a backlash, there's a form of rejection that is generated because it goes against my views, it goes against my views. I'm talking about how exactly, it's unfair to impose certain standards on people. So the moment when you allow this kind of content on conservative, liberal, progressive content, on conservative Facebook content, you say that the moment you do it, you're assuming that these conservative users want liberal, progressive content. You're trying to set a standard and say that as Facebook, you are able to dictate what is right and what is wrong in the end of the day. It's like when the US went into Iraq, they tried to impose burqa on Iraqis, and they found in the end of the day, women in Iraq just wanted burqa on. You're imposing that kind of standards on Facebook user itself, saying that this conservative society want to be exposed to it. Maybe we choose not want to be exposed to it, Mr. Speaker. Hence, you're using this unfair imposition to this certain conservative certain advantage. Second, you're alienating conservative view. First, you're alienating and silencing conservative view because you're telling them that we do not want to hear you, as we want to push our ideas to you, and it forces further discrimination on this conservative society and not bring organic change that should be happening at the ground level through the assimilation of information flow. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect conservative, good Christian voice like me, try not to use Facebook, but rather to discuss that society regularly. Thank you.
Yeah.
The question that opening opposition had to answer at the end of this debate was why was it that given that Facebook has proven itself to be a medium and corporation that is happy to stand for liberal progressive values to the extent that it allows for a rainbow filter at a point where when gay marriage is allowed in the United States, that this corporation is not able or allowed to take up the step to say that they are happy if people drop out and opt out of their own corporation because they want to forward the specific thing that they believe in. This is the thing that opening opposition never once tried to engage in. So we think there are two main things to do with this debate. Firstly, do we think Facebook has a right to do something like this? And we think that if we prove it, then their arguments of backlash are secondary to the idea because Facebook ultimately as a corporation does have the incentive and ability to do things like this. But secondly, we argue that Facebook will be effective, even if not so much change over becoming liberal progressive, that is allowing for better and richer and more fruitful discourse when people have more information again on the day of practice. First question, does Facebook have the right to do things like this? We think that over time, as Harry already mentioned, Facebook has shown itself to be a corporation that's happy to stand for things like liberal progressive. Then Zuckerberg has come out and said they happy for things like equal rights or equal pay or things like gay marriage, for instance. So yeah, we think we allow corporations at all instances the right to be able to forward their own ideas over there or their own goals in society in this course, as long as they are not actually actively coercing people to do so. No, thank you. So why exactly do we think that this falls well within the purview of what these corporations are able to do? When you walk into any kind of store, they are able to do things like, for instance, put out charity donation tent for specific causes that they believe in. We allow individuals to fund a political party that they believe in forward those specific goals that they want. We allow them to do things like hack certain election workers to thank you all their work as well, not forward thing. We think at the end of the day, corporations have earned the right to use the influence that they have as a result of their own hard work to build up their company to be able to forward those specific ideas that they have. To the extent that it's true, we would argue that these news articles are no different from the information had in your store. Why do you think all we are doing is pushing that information to your face? At the end of the day, your decision to continue to be a conservative is one that still rests on you. So more importantly, your decision will make you even click on the article still rests on you. We think that at the end of the day, if they want to promote these liberal progressive values, they should have the right to do things like this, because it's no different from other kind of corporate rights that we allow corporations to do all the time, because we recognize that corporations, many of people have the right to use that specific influence that they have gained for themselves. Yes, sir.
Would you allow services to deny like their treatment to the LGBT community because of their corporate?
Yeah, so you obviously have been ignoring what I said in the previous part. Things like, for instance, not allowing or not wanting to like give services to LGBT people is different because you're actively like denying them of an objective or tangible thing. To the extent you are simply nudging them and not actively coercing them towards a certain thing or denying them of the particular services or tangible benefits. We think that that's different. They want to argue for that Facebook is not denying them a service because they are now pushing these things on the front. But we don't think that necessarily true. And here's the second part of the debate we want to talk about. Why exactly will Facebook impact? The strongest argument that came up for opening opposition was the idea that somehow people will stop using Facebook, ignoring the reality that most people are not even aware of the fact that algorithms like this exist to begin with. They simply see the kind of articles that have said occur there, and to the extent they are not interested in their truth. You ignore it, you don't think deny them or something at all. But more importantly, Facebook will go on a whole host of other things as well. Like, for example, connecting with your friends. Somebody uses Facebook to chase me for money for MIDP on behalf of AUS. But also using for things like creating groups for group projects. Using for things like looking at seeing our friends in the update for instance, to the extent that they simply want to nudge us themselves to provide these new services. There are a whole host of other alternatives where their job is to provide these new services. And to the extent that they for Facebook, we think that the only thing that Facebook does is to nudge you into believing these things. You still have the option of unfolding posts, you still have the option of not clicking on those things. We think that this is under the purview and right of the particular corporation. Secondly, why do we think Facebook will impact? Not only do people not stop using Facebook and be very comfortable because they can use it for a lot of other things and quite an important part of their life. We think that the reason why it's important for conservatives to be the ones that are affronted because we think that liberal progressive values, by those definitions, oftentimes the things that don't occur in the mind of an individual. Open opposition was the same for a very idealistic picture that these individuals will somehow get information elsewhere, no fact and something. Here's the thing. We think that conservatives exist on a spectrum, right? There are people who are die-hard conservatives and the West Coast education. And there are people who just grow up in culture when they are just simply not aware of liberal progressive values, but the people around them may not necessarily believe these things. Or maybe they just like come from older generation, just don't have information about the fact that these values even exist in the first place. So to that end, we would argue that the die-hard conservatives are not the ones that we are attempting to change. Because the fact to the end that they are that way, we don't think that anything will necessarily change the way they believe it. We think necessarily change what they believe in. We think that the idea of selling is for the audience after what I use. They are not part of the debate, but rather what our objective is to ensure that people in the middle or people who are not as conservative as they are, basically with a lot of misinformation or the lack of understanding what is liberal progressive values necessarily are the ones who now access these things. When they see an interesting article and are excited or interested in finding out more, how does it exactly work? First, in fact, we tell you that these people oftentimes want to study, they're simply just not aware that these liberal progressive values are a thing. But secondly, they may think or they may believe as a result of society they go down to, that these are simply strange ideas and no ideas that have much general support. Because the people around them will believe in it. To the extent that now we push out these news articles from important news sites, for instance, or show the huge amount of support that these particular posts have in terms of likes or comments. We think we introduce them to a huge community of individuals who actually believe in it. Give them freedom to the idea and give us the assumption that these people have had their whole life, that these are huge assumptions that cannot be used. But secondly, we argue that even if it doesn't change the things that these people believe in, at the end of the day, political discourse is much more enriched. Why? Some of these people actually have accurate information about what the other side believes in. To the extent that liberal progressive individuals oftentimes already have information about conservative ideas, because that is in the core. That is a world that we live in. It's not difficult for you to access these conservative values. Actually, only conservatives are one, we are totally caught in the echo chamber of against that is product for the people they know. Because it's very easy when people confirmation bias either post or like believing the thing the product, believing it. To the end, we're having to expose them more information for them in the future political discourse or a better understanding of the information can be the system of the political that is true.
This is how I'm going to further the whole case. I'm going to talk to you about how is it that if you allow government policies to run, then what we're essentially doing is that we're weakening the narrative that people have in terms of holding what they feel and according to their those opinions and getting it across the other neighbor. So we're going to talk about that. So first of all, responses. It is important for us to know that the reason why Facebook is so successful and so much people subscribe to it is because they have always been value neutral. To the point of which ISIS runs the AI of Facebook as well, right? We're looking at how is it that because of this just way of showing information as it is only Facebook prerogative to ensure that this legacy continues and hence they become a viable company where the profit margins are still becoming very much so, right? Why is this important? Look, the moment when you set a standard upon which information gets filtered into the newsfeed and which are actively denied, then what is going to happen? That this method of prioritization will tell the groups that want to allocate the message, right? I.e., if someone is normal, like Christians who don't necessarily like gays, to the point of extreme actions like this, right? They would rather than try to re-emphasize whatever opinions which they have with their followers to the point of which there is no outside interference. The reason why this cause happens is because the third party is heard and that there is a discussion, much like how ISIS has to convince people to join their cause, right? Why say Allah Akbar, for example, is good, right? We see this is important. Why? Without this, then this would just be people who may or may not be using Facebook. So more importantly is that they stick to their own rules. If they are not going to look at news feeds that has a worldly view as to what people are talking about, then the converse would be that they're merely sending out private messages or messages that tag certain people and that other people won't necessarily know what they're talking about. And this would incentivize them to radicalize their opinions further as an effort to keep the users on one hand and to ensure that whoever wants to join them has to go through a more rigorous doctrine so as to not be exposed to other interactions because they don't know what the other party is necessarily talking about, right? This ambiguity is something that Facebook should not present for because it's harmful, right? We think information should go both ways because it is the discussion that works. So we're going to talk about how it works later. Okay, one time.
Sir, how do you know? How would these conservatives know that the algorithm has been changed when they can still get their conservative news on the news?
This is much what they know, right? The typical Facebook user knows that information that is put on their wall and then that is fed to the newsfeed is something that is generated by them as an individual user, right? We're talking about individual users who know that if this is what I put out, then it's what's going to be shown on the newsfeed, right? There should be no interaction or no sort of interference that come out from Facebook at all. That is how you know. The typical user will know this, right? That if you see that the messages on the newsfeed is something of which has suddenly been so, liberalized, then they will obviously not use the newsfeed portion at all. And we're saying that the newsfeed portion in today's Facebook is a very important function that allows you to know information from both sides of the story. Important fact, right? So how do we contribute further there, right? Look, this course happens this way. there's always going to be all these different arguments, be it something that's subtle, that's rational, to the point of which is practicalized, right? The reason why the newsfeed is so important, and that is something that it should be, very neutral in essence, is so that people have the ability or the opportunity to say whatever that it is on their mind, right? Much like how it's that we like to comment and share so much, right? Like we say, Allah, share is just going to be terrorist, things like that. So when we're looking at those kind of opinions, right? We're looking at how is it that people think that it is important that what they click actually matters. The point of which, if you think that your comment no longer carries as much weight, is the moment that you start slowly moving away from those avenues. And you move away from those avenues, that's when the discourse exactly stops, right? Much like what Joel is telling you, that on the worst case scenario, that you just gonna stop using Facebook altogether. But in the best case scenario from the side of the government, right? But again, I already told you that first of all, isolation is gonna happen. But what's gonna happen next is that these people, if they think that Facebook is no longer a tool to use, they would rather just use other avenues of information. It's much more difficult to track that the general public are not going to even know about. And we think that it is in the public's interest that we know what these people are up to and what kind of values that they're disseminating, right? Instead of having a faction that goes to the darknet, they use personal blogs that you cannot have access to, rather we want them to be on Facebook, and that there is a sort of a transparency element that people could use in order to judge for themselves whether this is radical or not, right? So the continuing question here would be, as to what if people actually still prescribing to, we're saying that at least people know who are the people who are vulnerable, who are being influenced negatively, and at least the general public is doing something about it, right? So if, for example, we have a mother who refuses to accept a gay son, then we're saying that at least the mother now is known to the public, and that public will have different avenues to persuade the mother that maybe having a gay son is okay, and that you should respect LGBT in so and so way, right? Well, it comes that there's this nuance of which they negotiate their way towards what society thinks are moral values that they want to keep. These avenues are not available under government spectrum because this incentivizes them from doing so. You might not know what kind of policy that Facebook is trying to generate, but you are going to be sure and surely offended if your newsfeed are full of values that you really don't give a crap about, right? That is when it's dangerous. So, what is it that society necessarily wants, right? We want an approach that is bottom-up. We want organic change. This organic change is better served if we have the ability to know specifically who said what, those community leaders, their messages, and whatnot, to get that accountability, right? It delivers weightage in that material. And from there, we can decide then whether we can believe in those values or not. That's top approach they talk about. That's just a dictatorship coming from Republicans that we don't want to talk about, right? Trump says that's still bad. No, that doesn't want to.
Southern Triangle is also triangle. This moment, the discussion is open, stop, and lack of contextualization and characterization of who a conservative is and why there is a lack of responsibility as well. And we, on growing, I'm going to answer 5 key questions. Why do conservatives continue to remain ignorant? And why it's so easy for them to do so? Secondly, why conservatives have huge super PACs back them up through lobbying and just adapted within the progressive sphere? Thirdly, why Facebook is not only what OG argued, why it's a legitimate channel, but why Facebook is the best channel and well equipped to handle sort of things. And fourthly, how we empower fans and modern conservatives to come out through the usage of the trend and understanding their perspective. The discussion in opening government happened that liberal progressive values are good. We are not going to take that well enough. What are we going to argue? We want individuals to have an informed choice on their how they lead their life, and then it's there. Secondly, they talk about victimization, which doesn't fall under the victimization. But this is what they wanted that we would put forward. They wanted to disrupt echo chambers, but there was a lack of analysis on why echo chambers exist. Secondly, they talked about why the region of Facebook and maybe why it's better. So then they have first characterization. Who are conservative people? But otherwise rational people that have been created to living in this way. So this is how the conservative media and conservative facts have a huge capital within human beings. They use fear, for example, vaccine, global warming, gun, refugees. They do not use rational arguments very the refugee who comes in could be there to kill you. They say that guns you need to protect yourself from other individuals. They target fear, which is something that eliminates rationality from the minds of otherwise rational human beings. And that's the problem, because we let them run rampant, and that's why the echo chamber was created. Because it does not target your rationality, it targets your fear and emotions and anger, and that's why it's problematic, and that's why conservatives choose to leave the echo chamber. But secondly, the media also support these conservative values through using fear. Like how Fox News come out and talk about Benghazi in such a horrible way. But then what happened when in the war in Iraq? They said no, we were always not against it. I don't know, but it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. We see how they target their market by using fear and using rhetoric that is so powerful that brings us emotion, and that's problematic. So we don't want to confront them on a frontal line. For what we want to use a subliminal way. So then when this indoctrination of fear has occurred, and there's also a huge chunk of plan-based thinking where you want to assimilate between the ideologies and beliefs of people around you. That is problematic. So you do not give the information that you otherwise would have if you're a liberal. Because as a liberal person, you generally take interest on the other person's value. That is the whole crux of being a liberal. You're interested in other uses. But conservatives are, that is all of the manifesto that we aim to. So when you give them the information, this is where there is better discourse on what did OO try to say, and this is a rebuttal of that. Is it this campus stuff? You don't think necessarily so. Because OO told you this, that they would leave Facebook. Two responses to that. Number one, Facebook is not just a friendly social media site, it is beyond that. It's also used for economic activity, it's also used for proper like marketing reasons, you have a group with your boss and stuff like that. So you need Facebook to remain relevant within the status quo, and that is something that they did not engage with. Because without Facebook, you lose a chunk of what the information that you would otherwise be getting. You wouldn't be in the same group with your boss anymore. You wouldn't be in the APU Malaysian debaters group anymore, and you would lack the knowledge of what is going on within the debate sphere. And these are spheres that are interesting. So it's not worthwhile just because Facebook puts trends in a different way. You're not going to leave Facebook all of a sudden and give up on all the other structures that you needed to draw time. Sit down. Secondly, what the other arguments for why Facebook is very good? Just like what Justin said, they're value neutral, and we accept that they're value neutral. I mean, even as a conservative, I would still get the conservative view. So this is not a frontal attack. The benefit of Facebook is this. Number one, it is usually scrolled through the confines of your own home, and secondly, you evaluate as value neutral. But what does that mean to be? It means that you don't think it's a confident to you. You think it's something that we assert that it's something a bit more of a subliminal approach. And that is beneficial because you take a greater interest into something in comparison when you have to defend yourself to another human being into the discourse that they want to do. You have the discourse within yourself and a machine which is not confrontational. That is the benefit of having Facebook subliminally doing it without your knowledge to do so. Before I move on, I'd like to have one question.
If you think that the B3 is a reflection of what people are thinking right now, wouldn't it be naturally more believable that you're going to strengthen your rhetoric and be more extreme in order to further your message?
No, we don't think so. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, what are we also going to talk about? Two important exceptions. We're going to talk about positive, conservative, and sensitive, and how we construct the method. And secondly, we're going to talk about how liberal values that scope are hugely discredited and how Facebook has a moral impetus to want to do this. Second one, number one, within the conservative community, then we have a better economic system. I mean, like the West Barrow Baptist, energy companies, anti-vaccine, number one, they're subscribed to by a lot of people. Like Fox News is the biggest watched news media channel in the world. Churches can gain a lot of donations and money to push forward their rhetoric. This is problematic because the super PAC of progressive and liberal values is active within the status quo. There isn't enough lobbying power, there isn't enough economic structure to want to push the liberal values. So this is where the crowding out happens for the liberal values to exist within the echo chamber. Because it is so easy for these economic structures to want to support their own individual values. The conservatives see there is no need for the conservative, but there is no ability for the conservative to receive it news. And because the structure behind the conservative values are so strong as super PACs and the churches, it does not help the conservative views. I mean, does not help conservatives want to find out about progressive views. The second issue, which is slightly more important, why it's better using Facebook? Because now you get to see the friends and they commented and like on your site, they like on progressive liberal site. I mean, as a friend of mine who loved it, and as a coordinate or a mod or someone who's a friend, who even if I'm conservative, I'm not too sure if I want. I think there are individuals who I have liked as a person, is interested in these different values. I'll be more willing to converse with them and ask about it. And they don't have that doesn't happen because they are usually at the bottom of the university and I don't get access to that. But if I say, hey, Kanda write something about anti-vaxxers being assholes. Why? I'm curious now. Kanda, my friend, who I kind of like and probably vote for this with, why do you like it? This was happening better if you bring it to a personal level. These individuals aren't informed. There's no enforcement of the individuals here, but bring it back.
The one thing all teams could agree on in this debate is that they wanted more inclusivity of all different kinds of communities and in a platform that's most productive for discourse and general well-being. From closing opposition, we will tell you and actually analyze the scale of harm that will exist when you create actual legitimate reasons for strong lobby groups that they were talking about, or very rich companies lash back institutions like Parliamentary, right? But more on that later in my session. But I mainly respond. We had an opening government team that just could not decide, right? They could not decide whether people can identify whether something was an active nudge towards them or not. That's why they kept on saying, well, people don't know the algorithm. They're just too dumb, right? They won't know that something is being influenced on them. At the same time, with the same argument that people have a right to not read an article. So that if it's so powerful and you can nudge individuals into reading your article, but in the same breath you say people can just ignore it, then it must not be that powerful. So that means you're not making that much of a change. That is why we feel these guys couldn't decide what their metric of influence was. The second thing we heard from the opening government was that, hey, Facebook's a corporation, it has a right. We generally agree, obviously that the dichotomy of service we think is being guided. What we think instead is that Facebook's right must be a discussion about the quality of Zuckerberg's right to do these things, right? So if truly Zuckerberg cared so much about the LGBT, right, he would evaluate whether this move would create more problems for the LGBT community, or would it just generally be better? At that point in which we asked the question, we considered that they would rather have a lot of people opt out of using Facebook than be in that community. We think that was our own inconcession. Also, why? Because at the point which you say Facebook is really important, people use it for many other things, there are two possible scenarios. The first is that you force people out of this great technology, technological advancements, and they get left behind by the rest of the world. Or B, you force them in that using that service because they have no choice, but you force them to go through every day a traumatic experience in the situation they'd rather not be in, right? So we think that is harmful as well. You needed to justify the trade-off. The third thing you will say is they say people don't know about liberal rights. That is something that they share with the floating government. We have many things to say about it. The first thing is, if it's true that people never knew at a point which they're 18 and can access to information, access to services at Facebook, they'll probably be very sound supporters of their faith, right? So that's problematic. So they come into this using Facebook with 17 years of continuous indoctrination of why your religion is okay. They see this as an affirmation that the end of days is coming, that they have to take a stand against this particular thing. Because if that was truly your characterization, this is the harm that you would have to deal with. The second thing in regards to this was the big concession in the Prime Minister's speech, right? That they would also teach these liberal values in school. But if that was true, then if all religious conservative families would take the children out of your school, put them in madrasas, put them in mission schools, and you have further insular communities that you cannot defend. But the third thing to that is they wanted to bear out this whole, people don't know, people want to know, but they don't know algorithms. If it's true that churches are so powerful, and if it's true that they have the ability to recognize influencers, obviously there are religious smart technicians also, right? So they're able to sense that there is something there. So you have to prove that people won't know these things, not just via enough. Same way I just did. So what are my exceptions? I have many, right? Some of these will clash with the closing government, a lot of it with the opening. The first is why is it harmful? But on a scale, right? Individuals, we also want people to become maybe more liberal, maybe more accepting of gay rights. But how does this happen? Because the first thing is, we'd rather people be on Facebook and see that atheists, LGBT, women, people that are like complete opposite to them, doing things and having the same kind of problems as them. Because what is the comparative? The comparative is the opt out of Facebook, right? And don't give any exposure. So we're not saying our burden on our side is that we want everyone to become like exactly the same. But what if they were able to empathize with the sort of pain and suffering that they see with the people in their same circle on Facebook? At least we have them sympathizing and being able to associate the same kind of fights that they have. But what is the comparative? On your side, you probably have this individual opt out of Facebook and becoming entirely insular and not being able to associate anything that is similar to their very different community. And we think that's bad, right? Because that leads us to the second half. What those conservative individuals do? At the point which they realize that your influence is so like amazingly effective, like what Koji wanted to say, at the point which that's true, churches and religious institutions will use this as a signaling effect in their religious institutions to say, look, Facebook is being infiltrated by liberal values, Satan is winning, the end of this is coming, all of your should opt out. This leads to further harm. I'll take one point now.
Right. When the Supreme Court shut down Roma, also said at the end of this was coming. You therefore think that because it hurt the LGBT movement, hence this thing should not happen.
Yeah, of course. If it hurts it, they definitely shouldn't have shut down Roma, and I'll give you one. What is in addition to that, at the point in which these things are seen as being attacked, I'll address it and I'll signal to you when I do, is that they will start funding a Jesus book, right? So like an alternate like Facebook social networking site, and they'll start pressuring you, the Christian, and identify as someone that's Jesus loving, to opt into this insular networking site where you only see a fellow brother and sister of Christ. And that's particularly more harmful than having a plethora of influencers in one social media site. Engaging with your POI now. At the point in which Prop A was probably going to succeed, right? What happened was, for every one advertisement that you saw that supported the gay marriage as an ordinary, normal thing, what is extremely wealthy and influential Catholic Church did was they started funding for every one advertisement 10 more of the conservative traditional home. What this meant was individuals that you so care about, for instance, your mom would most likely buy into this advertising and opt into believing that the traditional marriage is the way because of the predominant narrative and extreme wealth that you will make because you antagonize religious institutions. What is the burden that we prove from the closing opposition? We've given you three things. We told you that we share similar concepts, but at the end of the day, as soon as you infiltrate and you make it really powerful with influencers, you have more likely a stronger lashback by strong religious communities, or even to that particular individual that feels really uncomfortable now in your Facebook. You put them in a category two. Either they stay and be demonized by the rest of their friends for staying, or they opt out and lose out on the entire benefits that all opening things on the top of that. Facebook is a great day and it should be shared by every different kind of individuals in society. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, one thing you need to understand is that individuals believe in an idea if it's convenient. This means if I'm constantly being circulated by idea, that idea is convenient to me, I will believe that. The moment individuals start believing in convenient ideas, which they don't have to then challenge themselves to believe, it then becomes their culture. The moment this becomes their culture, it then becomes an absolute for them, and they will not move away. Under their paradigm, it's convenient for individuals to believe in conservative views. It's convenient for these individuals to go that way. That is why then it becomes a culture for them. And that is why you see people that have absolutes following the Bible as the only way forward, the only doctrine to follow. Under their side, you create a systemic problem where you exist in those things. We think that's the problem this way. What am I going to do is for you very quickly. One, I'm going to engage a little once around Togo. I showed you why it's making sense to begin with, because they were just about to. And then I'm going to show you a few flashpoints as a whole, right? Now, quickly, right? What did Channel essentially come up with? Now, first idea was how probably not everybody's going to opt out of page in all of this. Now, I think it's not listening to difference because we told you a lot of people have group work, a lot of people have bosses and all these things. That means that even if, right, that I want to opt out, I'm not necessarily going to do so because I need to be in that company group. I need to be there to begin with. That means that individuals will opt out to begin with. But even if those individuals do not have companies where they essentially work in, right, they are friends who are also conservative who will be in that group, which means that discussions will happen around that point. Next, we came up with this whole idea and talked about people will be well entrenched by the time they reach Facebook. These entire arguments continue upon the fact that people join Facebook when they're 18. No, Sharon. People join Facebook when they're 12 to 13. This is when their minds are developed. This is when their opinions are on their own. This means, this is why it makes a difference. Because when you target an individual who's 12 and 13, and when it comes to Facebook, you're all the same things, that is when the achievement starts to rationalize for himself. That is when this individual can then make those decisions. So, those individuals will not be so biased to believe everything right. It's not already indoctrinated. That's an age where those individuals can give to these exposures. Then they came up with this whole view about why is it so important not to do this. Because you have companies funding all these advertisements. Fine. But the problem is, the elder reservists will not put that on top. You can fund all you want, waste your money all you want, but the liberal views will still go on top. Those will still come on the bottom. It doesn't make a difference. The algorithm changes that. So, what are my flash points essentially in this page? Number one, why Facebook? Number two, what's the ripple effects to society? You can sit down. Number one, why is Facebook? Right? Simple. Because we can really characterize this to you. Facebook. It's the social sphere for an individual. It used to be going out there and meeting with your friends, but now because everybody's anti-social, it's sitting behind your room locked room door on your computer. That has become your social sphere because you think that is where that is the best discourse, and that is where all the opinions generate. Few responses why this is important. Why? So they came up here and talked to you about there will be more organic change on this side, and that's why it's bad. Few responses to that. Number one, Number one, they came up and talked to you that discourse will such happen. Discourse happens only if you're willing to allow other people to put their opinions in. That means if I'm an individual who essentially does not want to open myself up to discourse, I will not open myself up to discourse. That means those individuals don't make the change. But here's the difference, right? I don't need to open myself up for discourse if I just want to sit in my room and use Facebook. That means you're less likely going to be confrontational, or you're less likely going to see that the thing. This is what we told you about subliminal, right? I mean, subliminal, because you don't realize that this is essentially happening, right? And that is something which you're able to engage. But number two, right? This is why this essentially happens better, right? Because this is the game point which you is not engaged. When you have discourse on the other side, which is the only way you're moving forward, individuals are then forced to defend those ideas and defend those narratives. When I essentially have to defend my ideas because you see me as a conservative, not someone who believes in discourse, I then become more conservative because I justify reasons. So I may have a Mexican friend, but because you ask me, forcing me into a position of defending anti-immigration, I'll be like, no, all Mexicans are bad. And then because I've taken that stance, the society will then see me as an individual bad. And if I do flip my stance, I'm then not into this position. So when you have this sort of information as a whole, I can internalize. This will be even more elaborated in my second point. Okay.
Very simple analysis. The only thing that's going to happen is that when you're in your room and you're not being so confrontational about it, some people take it away, but more people would rather strengthen their rhetoric and say, look, newspeak is already against me. I have to be more radicalized. What is the response to that?
Simple, right? This comes down to the second point, right? About how even if, right, you want to be even more radical, then number one already happens in status quo, and number two, you can still find a way around it. So this moves on straight to my second point. How this essentially helps to ripple back into this society, right? Now, here's the problem with the other side. It came up here from both sides, okay, including told you. How people are drawn on these views, right? Number one, few things you need to understand. This already happens in status quo. When individuals go to, for example, hate justice and all these things, they already get drawn out as a whole. That means the radicalization already exists in status quo, right? That is not something new just suddenly happened. It's problematic under your side as a whole, right? Because at the end of the day, an individual who wants to be like calm and radical and even if, right? Even if under the other side, then there are more, because okay, there are more people will be radical, more people come on. Even if more people essentially come on, we need to realize that the people who bring the indoctrination isn't anybody in the higher up. The people on the ground who you're trying to indoctrinate, who are still permeable and can change your ideas, those individuals are the ones who will be sitting on Facebook. Those individuals will be exposed. So if the change in your perception happens there, that is why it's so better, because you spread this information in your personal sphere. immediately that gets into me more because that's my personal sphere. It starts literally going into my head. But second, more importantly, right? Any individual who wants to come on and have a discourse will be backlash by society quite a lot. You need to realize that most of these individuals are usually living in a conservative area. That means when they came up here and told you, oh, you have other exposure and other alternatives to find things. Now, it's contingent upon the fact that A, those things exist in the first place. B, that if I go on and look at a liberal book or something, that people around me won't be judging me, right? The problem here right now is that a lot of people judge, a lot of people feel these judgments because you get name and shame in society, and the name and shame stigma doesn't go away. However, when you have this sort of Facebook posts and all, I'm more willing to go on there. Why? Number one, because it's everywhere, everybody has to see. There's a reason for me to go, hey, have you seen that liberal post about why immigration is good? They have a reason to come up without having to essentially be, oh, I'm pro immigration. But number two, we can see who are the individuals who like the post, who are the individuals who probably supported that post. That means I don't have to go and look at and find someone, hey, are you okay in immigration? No, I will go to those individuals who are okay in immigration, which means that I have a lesser risk of alienating myself. Because the problem here is people feel the moment I open myself up, that's the moment everybody judges me. But now I know who to talk to, and then there is this support structure. So when you slowly start to have it in a conservative view, a lot of people start to get curious enough. That is when you have discourse internally. Discourse only yours has only happened with a liberal and a conservative. Our discourse happens with conservative and conservatives. That is why we need this debate.
This is the side that wants to change individuals, fight the church, fight the bigotry, and fight the patriarchy. It's also the side that will allow you to hide news articles that will pop out of Facebook when it's convenient, and maybe subtly nudge you because that's enough. We think your soft starts will cause you to debate, but the point at which you don't come to be the force of the church and the patriarchy, the point at which you're nudging and your subtle messaging will absolutely be that. So which one is it? Is it that it's a small influence that people won't realize it? Or is it a big influence? People will realize it and take change and charge it. We think both scenarios are true. Before I go on to explain why it's not zero starting is, I like to view closing government in two ways. The first thing we say, we think they have their view, but then it's non-confrontational, and as a result, it will be subliminal, and you're more likely your personal space to engage with it. The first thing we will say is, independent of whether or not it's non-confrontational and it's your personal sphere, the point of which you actually engage those things, and your parents find out, or you are in a community that's deserving, is the point at which it becomes confrontational, and you expressing those beliefs means you actively being victimized. So it doesn't matter, we think people will be in a worse off position. The individuals who say 13 years old, who are maybe homosexual in the Bible Belt, who just not have access to Facebook, and internalize all those harms you say they are prone to become Satan is intervening, the church is being victimized, son, it's time to go home to back into the church. But the second thing he did was he just ridiculed God's algorithm. He said, well, our algorithm just fix the loving power of the world. Well, your algorithm can't fix Fox because your algorithm can't fix the churches. It cannot prevent a servant from going on and doing all that radical. Your algorithm only goes so faster. So we think radicalization is a status quo moving forward in your world, the point at which lobbying amplifies. So we think it's not enough and insufficient for them to say, we can your ideas in their personal space, but the world we live in is so horrible that individuals will be victimized. What? So we closing opposition, closing government is out of this case. Before I explain what you are wrong, yes. Right, the problem that Zero had was lobbying and people being in an echo chamber where we had overwhelmingly everyone conservative. That's not happening right now with the current algorithm that we're using with all the conservative friends and conservative articles for you. Yeah, so we think the scale people are conservative now and we put echo chamber, so further the echo chamber for them worse off place instead of thinking that they will never be able to escape out. Lobby people who say help strike down the Defense of Marriage Act, won't even enter the community. What is your problem? The two things they said before I went to the two sessions was that people should opt out of Facebook. So it was very convenient for them to say, you're already connected on Facebook, therefore you won't opt out. So the point at which my religion is being harmed and Satan is online, it doesn't matter, my businesses can go, my communities can go, my friends can go, I must survive for myself. So So being connected is not a reason why religious people won't opt out. So they will. And we can definitely lose out. Networking, they lose out the capacity to extend reach to people who are atheists and homosexual, people who live outside the community, and they might have had to interact as a result of their business or other things of that such. So we can keep them out of Facebook is the worst possible thing you can do at your side. But the second thing they said was, it's a scale. So we're not going to change some because we'll just change other things. So we agree that not everyone is the best for Baptist church, but on a scale, we think a lot of conservatives like homosexuality is a sin and your children shouldn't be corrupted. So maybe you won't change the West Baptist church. You make a lot of people a lot of conservative as a result allowing them to opt out because they can hide inside. Two questions. Is it principally justified for Facebook to do this? And second, how do we minimize victimization of minorities? The first question, should Facebook principally do this? It was very convenient for them to say we did it with the rainbow flags of people's profile pictures. Therefore, everything was fine then. We regret that they had the rainbow flags and we think that reached a lot of conservatives to get angry. We look on the side of the post, we think there were 200 comments that just told you shouldn't take this position because the game is up. The point at which you make people choose between their liberal values and being conservative, the point at which they will just radicalize and go back to a worse off position. But the second metric they said was you must have a tangible objective benefit. Because we think all these liberal values have a tangible benefit to them. So the first thing we will say is corporate social responsibility is heavily tied to impact on people. So if there's no tangible objective benefit for the gay man in the Bible, then we think it's not corporate social responsibility, and we don't think that's a getaway kind of thing we used to say it's an objective metric. It doesn't have objective outcome. So we don't think principally justified, even if the intention is valuable in of itself. Having said that, but the second question I have, the more important question is, how do we minimize the victimization of minorities? They say we must break the echo chamber that is Facebook, because Facebook perpetuates bigotry. No. Facebook doesn't perpetuate bigotry. The people that surrounding those communities perpetuate bigotry. Facebook replicates that. To the point at which Facebook no longer replicates that, their communities were selected. The people you said conservative and horrible individuals who run churches, who run sermons, who tell people to give conversion therapy, those people are selected. So what happens in your work? Those echo chambers that exist independent of Facebook will become worse. So you might neutralize and make Facebook more liberal, but you make communities outside a lot worse. So countries will start propagating, start saying there is a liberal agenda. We don't even have to prove the technicians will find out the algorithm exists. The fact that there's more progressive values is plausible reason to believe that Satan is out on our earth, so we think that's a reason to do it. No, never see. But the second thing they said in preventing minorities from being victimized is we must change the ignorance. But some people are just ignorant and they don't know what they're doing. So the first thing we will say is the point at which you remove the ignorance and give them access to the value is the point at which religious parents and religious communities will say that ignorance is preferable than you learning satanic things, and they will just push them back into ignorance. Or the second thing is the point at which they learn these things. It's the point at which they will just go back to the conservative value. So when the ignorance doesn't change, they just get fueled with the alternative source. But the third thing we will say is on a balance, we would prefer a world in which people maybe have an echo chamber, maybe a gay group on Facebook, and a world in which they actively victimize people on the ground because you're taking away my networking site, you're taking away my community in the world, you're infiltrating the technology that's kept me from meeting the rest of my family is in other places of the world. So we think on a balance, if you want to save minority group, it is on this side. But the third thing we will say is, do we enforce stereotypes? So apparently, we don't prevent echo chamber, we will enforce stereotypes. We think, and it's preferable that we enforce current stereotypes than create new ones where people actively victimize individuals, maybe find another copy in another country. We think tangible outcomes are far worse than enforcing stereotypes that just exist on the net. So we think on a balance, we prefer individuals not being unradicalized, maybe becoming homophobic, but that's not translating into disallowing your base out of Facebook, disallowing people access to communication. The conclusion to this is, in our fight to prevent the victimization of minority groups, the first thing we must prevent individuals from being is in a position of victimization. But the point at which you victimize conservative communities, the point at which they have everything to do. And that's the point at which they don't want to see you as a human being, they see you as people taking away my will from God. We think that's the point at which you lose the discussion. That's a really rough.
I don't know.